So welcome back to our discussion of React. We're going to create another React component manually, but this time I'm going to show how to apply CSS to that example. So this is an earlier example when we were discussing the content box model versus the border box model of CSS, and we're going to start with this code and see if we can add this to our React element. So first thing I want to do is get the HTML here copied, and then we'll add that to a React component next. We already have this plain component added that we added in our previous lecture. So I'm going to just copy this, Control C, Control V, and copy that file and rename it. And I'll rename it box, or box model. Okay, so I'll rename this box model. And then I'll go back to copy the code here and replace this code here. Now I'm going to make a mistake on purpose here. I'll just replace this code here with the code I directly copied here. So the problem here, there's a couple of problems. Number one, I'm trying to return more than one element, and recall that we can only return a single element. We can have nested elements within that single element. In fact, that's the way it works, but we can't return multiple elements. So I need another div up here to contain these elements. So I'll remove this tag here. And I left behind a element here. And we'll fix this up. All right. I'll hit Alt-Shift F here to format. No formatting help. So it's fussing at us still. The reason why it's fussing at us is because JSX, remember, this is not HTML, this is JSX. JSX requires end tags on everything. So you can put an end tag over here, but the easiest way to do it is just to simply do this. This is not something HTML insists on, right? HTML has the idea of self-closing tags, which is what those are, but JSX does not have self-closing tags. You have to explicitly close all tags, and that's what we've done here. And you can see that I fixed the two problems. Namely, I return a single component, a root component, and then all tags within the HTML looking stuff, it's really JSX, are closed. All right, so now we have our component. Let's hook it up. So it's fussing at us because we're not using it and we're still exporting plain. So I'll copy this to export the right class name here. And then we'll use it. So I'll go over to index.js. By now, we know we need to import box model. Remember, the relative path is required here. You can't just say, even though it's in the same folder, you can't just call out box model. So it's not being used. Let's use it. And we'll hit refresh. This is our old example here that's showing. Let's look at our React app, and we'll dock it here. So this doesn't have CSS, so I use the standard box model. I use the standard box model border box. So let's see how to add CSS to React application. So React is component based. So it breaks up, let's say, what you think of as a normal web page into a subcomponents. It's really handy. So the CSS is actually broken out for most part into components as well. We have this index CSX, which is overall CSS for the application and applied throughout. But for the most part, components are styled locally. So we have this model here with app.css that was just given to us when the application was created. So we have app.css and app.js. So the notion here is that apps.css, here it is imported here, is local CSS for app.js, and we're going to follow that pattern here. So following that pattern, we need a CSS file called box model. So create a new file. Okay, and we'll go over to our previous instance of Visual Studio. And just pretty much straightforward. You copy the CSS. We may have to do some adjustments on it, but for now we'll just copy it into this. Save it out and see what the effect is. Maybe we have to hit refresh. Oh, I'm not using it yet. So over here in boxmodel.js, I need to import it. And the import here, this is not really standard JavaScript, I have to say. This is something I think the build system is doing for us. And we'll discuss the build system later when we get to deployment of this. But the CSS is being handled here and turned into kind of a JavaScript object by the build system. So following the syntax example we have in app.js, we import app.js. I'll just copy that over to my box model and then fix it up. And there we have it. Now, if we recall our original page, it looks slightly different. So here's the original page with the CSS. And the reason why it looks a little different, let's bring it back up again, is that we also have the CSS that comes from index.css here. That's the CSS that was just given to us as the default. Let's just delete this and we'll see how it looks. All right, looking much more like its original, and now coming from React. Let's review. So I created boxmodel.js by copying plain.js and modifying it. Modified it by calling it boxmodel and exporting the boxmodel. And then I import boxmodel.css. So that's fixed up by the build system and given to us in a convenient way. The other thing we did was replace the JSX with JSX for the box model example, and that had to be modified a little bit for us. We had to include the whole thing in a div, and we also had to close all the HTML elements, which remember are JSX elements that require closing tags. Then I deleted index.css, and I'm going to actually put that code back, Control Z. It messes up the look of it from the original, but I don't want to test this because we'll use this. We may use this for further examples. And then finally we visit index.js and modify that. So now I have actually three components that I've added here. The original app, which I can put in here, save it, and we get the original app back. I have plain. So you get the notion that those are, notice that our CSS is affecting us from the box model, which to tell you the truth, I don't quite understand. But we're getting the salmon pink background. I'm going to investigate that further. And I'll put it back to app now. So I went over to app.js. I'm going to make a couple of changes here. I'm going to insert a plain tag here, a plain element. It has to be a closing tag, remember, and this is a perfectly fine way to do it. Empty content. Hit save. Failed to compile. Let's fix that. So I needed to fix up and add an import statement here, so it knows about that identifier. But notice now what's happening. And this should give you a clue about how React apps are built. We've been modifying index.js to call out these different elements as we've created them, as we've seen. But really, index.js is hardly ever touched. It just refers to app as the root component, and then everything else is kind of bootstrapped into components. So you add components together, like this. App.js, and we have one more example we can use. Box model. See how that looks. Again, closing tags, and of course, the import is actually added manually for it. Added automatically for me. I have a Visual Studio plugin, I think, that's doing that for me. I'll help you if you need that added for me. I didn't know why plane wasn't added before me before, but now we have our box model. It's looking weird, probably because of all the CSS that we've added here. But we can see how components can be hooked together, one inside the other, to create an entire React application. See you next time.